So,
Hey,
today we're talking about
Heidegger, Martin Heidegger.
German philosopher from mid 20th century. Really kind of interesting. And where do you want to start?
I don't know where to start, Daniel. I'm going to be honest. I tried to do my homework on this guy, and it seems like every piece of information that I looked into was just as confusing as the last one. And I know we talked about Heidegger before, and you were saying that his material is like really difficult to get through. But I felt like there would be someone on the internet who could like make it digestible for the average everyday person. And like every YouTube video I watched was just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So I don't know what this episode is going to be like, but I'm
I,
excited.
I'm hoping I can try and help, or through our conversation together, we can try and help people understand why Heidegger is such a important philosopher for people's lives. But at the same time, I would not know anything about Heidegger unless I had studied him with a tutor to help me. So he was one of the philosophers I needed handholding to get through to understand what he means to having a better life and a more authentic life. So yeah, it is he doesn't help himself with the language he uses and stuff.
Oh, this, I know it's probably backwards. This is Being in Time. I had this. I got this from a used bookstore like months ago, probably almost a year ago. And
You
I just thought it was a cool title and something to, look forward to reading later, but
you are in ownership of one of the most important philosophical pieces of work of the 20th century.
who would have thought? And it cost me $7.
Oh
Guys,
my
hit up
god!
your used bookstore, you guys.
When I was studying it, it cost me about 35 euros, about $40 to buy that book. And that was back in like 2001, 2002.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really, oh, I can't believe you just got that for that cheap. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Um.
He's one of those like philosophers that you can kind of randomly open a page, read a sentence, and go, "What the hell does that mean?" And just think about that one sentence for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. So, okay. Do you want to start with your knowledge of him, or do you want my impression of him? How do you want to do this?
Either or, you know me, I'm fairly easygoing. I can delve into like a basic kind of like who he was as opposed to his philosophy, and then we can go over to yourself and ask you about your impression before we discuss the philosophy
Sure.
and stuff.
Yeah. Let's do an overview of who is this guy.
Okay, Martin Heidegger is probably one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century. He was German born, he lived in German countryside, and he kind of like formed a new way of seeing the world in the late 19th, early 20th century. The guy who was like his predecessor was Edmund Husserl, and they kind of pioneered this type of philosophy called phenomenology, which is looking at things in themselves, the phenomenon of a thing. That might sound like all over the place, but that's kind of like, like looking at Brooklyn as Brooklyn, not looking at Brooklyn as, a business person or Brooklyn as but looking at you as you. Because sometimes we seem to kind of like categorize, and we talked about it in the last episode on Levinas, that we box people in too much. And phenomenology is about studying and understanding people in themselves, as opposed to like the attachments and labels we put on. So, Martin Heidegger is really important for two aspects. So, he's coming into this new way of seeing things and this new type of philosophy called phenomenology, but also a new type of philosophy called ontology. So, in metaphysics, which is the study of stuff, there's cosmology and there's ontology. Cosmology is like physics. It's what's the world made of and what are things and where do we come from? But ontology is the study of being. What is it to be? What is it to live? Why do we live? Why do we even exist? And that's where Martin Heidegger's coming in. He's like, okay, I need to know why we're even existing. What is it to actually be? And he talks a lot about it in Being in Time. So he's one of the first ontologists. Onta means being, and ology is study of. So to give you a tiny bit of background on who he was from a German family. He was involved with the Nazi Party, and he took a bad reputational hit as a result. Nobody really paid any attention to his work after the war because he was involved with the Nazis. But he afterwards condemned them because he didn't realize what was happening in the background. He was like an old academic at the time. Now, to how much he actually knew, who knows? But he distanced himself from the Nazis afterwards. But he was kind of like one of their main philosophers during the war. So that did tarnish his reputation pretty badly. And it kind of calls into the question, do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do we say we can't study this man because he was a member of the Nazi Party? So that in itself was really interesting, even independent of what he was saying and his philosophy. So yeah, that's an intro to who Martin Heidegger was.
When I was listening to the different videos I was trying to like learn about this guy, um, I think the best way, like if I had to describe what I got from that information, was that he was looking for who we are beyond the identity. Would you say that is true?
Um, I yes, kind of. Like, it depends what you mean by identity. So his
Like,
ultimate drive is the authentic self.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
So,
and I think in that he's the most important philosopher for today. Because I think that a lot of people feel utterly lost in what he calls the chatter of the day self, but we could call it like the herd of society. And they find it difficult to form their own voices and who they are as individuals. So that drive to find the authentic self is for Heidegger what we need to do.
like who you are beyond the, um, what's the word I'm looking for? The, not the effect, the, what's the word? The influence
Kind of
of
like,
other people.
yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
I feel like
Yeah.
he was taking it a layer deeper by saying there was something someone pointed out, and it was like who you are beyond even like the thinking of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he didn't trust the social conditioning that was there
Yeah.
in you.
So to me, like what popped into my mind when I heard that was like the one doing the thinking. That's who he's looking for,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of it goes hand in hand with the philosophy of like non-duality, self-awareness, just like pure consciousness type of thing. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
So it almost took like a
totally.
spiritual turn, whether he realized that or not. That's how I interpreted that.
I would say that Martin Heidegger in the 20th century is the closest you'll get to spiritual philosophy that's totally rational. There's nothing like, there's nothing irrational or unrational in him, but when you read the stuff, it does get really spiritual. Someone in the comments has said kind of like Eastern philosophy, and yeah, very much so. Very like kind of like Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism, Taoist philosophy is very, very close to being in time, and he was influenced by those too.
I think that just goes to show like there are so many little nuggets of truth everywhere, and we're all coming to these conclusions, but they're expressed differently because of who we are, like in our individual identities, kind of make it like put our own little spin on it, But at the end of the day, we're really all looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
That I think is correct, and that's something that's really beautiful. We have that commonality with everyone else, that we're all searching for that an ability to authentically express ourselves and be ourselves. Um, like the first point he remarks in life chronologically is when we're born, there's a thing called thrownness. We're thrown into the world with our births, and when we're thrown into it, it's not just that we're physically born, we're metaphysically, we're personally and psychologically thrown into our families, our nations, our communities, and we're totally like enmeshed. And he saw it almost like falling into like a sticky, gluey type of substance that you'll unless you really try hard, you're not going to be able to free yourself of to try and find your authentic self. That, as you say, the kind of the central core, the central consciousness of yourself. So he throws down the gauntlet and says, guys, you've been thrown into the world. Your challenge is to unthrow yourself, become yourself again. So how do you do that? So that's the big question
How
that
do
he
you do
asks us.
that?
Well, in being in time, it is like a manual to do it. So he breaks it down. There's a few different things. So one of the first things he says is death is really important. We have to contemplate death. We have to face death, not just like as an idea, but to emotionally and personally experience death, either through risk and thinking, oh my God, I almost died there, and taking stock and realizing what's important in our lives, or through the loss of a loved one. It opens the door to appreciate the beauty of life. And that idea of death in Heidegger is something that's really important. And it kind of echoes as well how some philosophers call Buddhism a death cult. Like, that it uses death as a mirror to understand life. And Heidegger would be very close in the same way that, it's kind of about, every time you kind of touch death or you lose someone that you love, it shakes you into waking up a little bit. And that waking is the inner part of yourself that you spoke of, Brooklyn, that inner conscious part of yourself, that real core. That's it going, oh, I'm here. And that experience is as waking me up, and it makes you more yourself. It brings you back to authenticity. So
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I think that we don't like to think about death because it's like, why would you, But when I consider death and remind myself this is all temporary, and because it's temporary, now it's like, oh, well, what am I going to do with my time? Time is ticking, Not necessarily like time on a clock, but just like this experience will end. How do I make the most of it? And it reminds you that, yeah, we have a job and, you gotta, take care of things. But at the end of the day, like this is an incredible experience, an incredible opportunity of the spirit or of the self to have. And even though every experience is different, some people have more difficult experiences, some have very fun and, wonderful experiences. At the end of the day, we're here to learn and grow. But who's growing and who's learning? And if we die, what good is it? And so I think that, I don't know, I mean, I think that people's understandings of the afterlife or how they choose to perceive the afterlife has a big effect on how they would interpret these things. But for me, I do feel like energy never is destroyed, and so it just transforms into something else, whatever that is. And I believe in that. I believe that that growth and that learning that we do in this physical body has some sort of meaning after this particular experience is over and is birthed into something new. But I mean, like, if people don't, I just kind of like made this question as I was saying that, like, people who don't believe in afterlife or people who don't see more to this than this physical, is there any way to like comprehend Heidegger or accept anything that he's saying, or do you have to have this idea of an afterlife or like God or like something bigger than this?
not necessarily. It was one of the questions we contemplated in university when studying this, that because we were young, we didn't have those a lot of us didn't have those experiences that some of us would have now as a result of like 20 years of living since then. But not necessarily, because all you need is the almost like a healthy anxiety to question everything. Like that anxiety that a lot of young people, particularly like in their late teens, Heidegger would have recognized that as a healthy questioning of existence. It's the part of you throwing off the thrownness. It's the part of you trying to be yourself. And when people are growing up and they're going from young kids to being teenagers, they're becoming rebellious because it's the core of themselves trying to break free of the chrysalis of their youth, the chrysalis of what was their social conditioning, their family they were born into. Again, he calls it the chatter, of society that enmeshes us and coats us, and we try to break free of that. But sometimes it's too hard, and sometimes we give up and we come back into, well, yeah, I rebelled. I had my crazy time. Now it's time to go and get a job and get a mortgage and then retire and die. and that's it. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you know what? That one sliver of moment, those few years where you lived free, that was the real you. And you can still have that. You can still get a mortgage. You still get a career, but never stop the search. Don't. Just because it's uncomfortable, it doesn't mean it's not going to lead to something really meaningful. So that's one of the core things that he would say is that there's a tension which is healthy in some people. Um, if you find life uncomfortable, or if you find it difficult, or you're always kind of thinking, well, I don't really belong, maybe you're asking the right questions or actually feeling the right things because you're actually getting in touch with the center of the self, and you're throwing off that social conditioning and the chatter and thrownness that Heidegger talks about in Being and Time. I would say there's three things he talks about in society called diseases of the soul, and he particularly says that like it's a disease, but it's also an uneasiness, so a dis-ease of the soul, and one of them is that we've forgotten to notice we're alive, in order not to question too deeply, and society loves us not to question because we're good citizens and we're good consumers if we don't question, and we just go about our business and get our frothy lattes and don't rock the boat and live outside the system. So we've forgotten to realize we're alive, and death teaches us that we're alive. So that's why it's really important. And the second one is this comes right back to the Hinduism and the non-duality, is we've forgotten that everything in being is connected. Our egos block us from oneness with the world around us, and in this second dis-ease of the world, he is really reflecting Hinduism philosophy in particular, that there's a oneness to the world. We're all connected, and that when we hurt ourselves, we're hurting others, or we hurt others, we're hurting ourselves. And likewise, helping others helps ourselves, and it's a beautiful idea, and it brings us home. And the third one is that we've forgotten to live freely, and this is kind of a scary one because it's the one which is most pertinent to modern day. We love this idea that we're individuals, that we're independent, that we're free, but it's a particular brand of freedom. You're free, absolutely, as long as you don't do X, Y, and Z. You're free as long as you cater to the most up to date fashions and you don't feel like you're sticking your neck out on, by wearing something stupid or silly so we have forgotten to be ourselves as individuals, away from the social conditioning and the herd instinct of the individual. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So they're his dis-eases of the soul, and he did anticipate that in his later years that if the world was to become a capitalistic type world, it would certainly be probably the greatest opportunity to exercise individuality. But because of trends and businesses and corporations, it would be a more insidious form of lack of freedom, that we would always feel free but not actually live free. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Do you think it's possible for people to be truly authentic and to have some sort of cohesive system where we're all sort of like working toward, like capitalism, for example, just because you brought it up? If everyone stopped buying into all the same trends and everyone was like expressing themselves very authentically, would it even work, do you think? Or how would that work?
I, I, I personally feel that it wouldn't work unless we have the second dis-ease cured, which is the connectivity with everybody else. Because if you have absolute freedom without care towards everyone, you'll just do whatever you want, and it doesn't matter if you hurt someone else. But if you really do appreciate the connectivity of existence, you will do whatever you want, and your want will have the primacy of care. And that, like last month we talked about Levinas, and he says that you know what, you're free to do whatever you want as long as your want is healthy enough to not hurt anyone. So, and that's the authenticity. But when you're coming to your truest self is connected with others. So when you really become your authentic self, you actually do want care for others.
Yeah, it's like coming back to kindness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I do think that people think that, well, if everyone just does what they want, it's going to be chaos. And you have to first heal your individual self before you can kind of put that out into the world. So I
Yeah.
guess what I'm saying is like we always look to other people. Other people aren't going to act right. Other people aren't going to do what they're supposed to do. You know, it's not going to work.
Mm.
But instead, we should flip it around and say, what about me? Can I do this? Am I being my most kind self? How can I be my most authentic kind self? And when you do that, I think, well, in my opinion, it gives more confidence in other people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you just sort of start believing in the goodness of people, and it just sort of becomes something that is real, and it
Yeah.
kind of takes away the fear of other people when you realize our capacity to love and to be kind and to be
Mm-hmm.
that authentic nature of, I believe, what we're always meant to be. So
It also kind of brings us back to the idea that when you meet someone who hurts you, instead of saying that's a bad person, you just say, actually, that's a person that just hasn't reached their authenticity yet. Don't hate them for that. So when you see a person who hurts you, I like when I see a person who hurts me, I don't look at them as a bad person. I look at them almost like as a person who doesn't quite understand themselves. And if they understood themselves more authentically, they wouldn't want to hurt another person because they'd know that they're connected to me. So that for me is always a kind of, I try not to be like patronizing, but it's almost like looking at a child and going, well, yeah, you're just misbehaving.
it's
Not out of any
compassion.
badness, but yeah. So there's like, I wouldn't say there's evil people in this world. It's just that people do things out of the social conditioning and the thrownness that Heidegger talks about, because they haven't found their authenticity yet. But I am absolutely sure, and I have faith, that when people find their authentic selves, they actually become much better people to one another. I've never known a person who really has reached a level of authenticity who still wants to make a killing off someone or still wants to, do someone over because that's what I do. There's an absolute genuine compassion that comes off them. So it's nice.
You become it. It's not just something you know, it's something that you are.
Yeah, yeah. It's lovely. It's wonderful. Um, and I think as well, you can get that same sense when you have children. You can get that same sense when you have pets as well, because it means there's something outside of yourself that you're connected to that's as important as yourself to you. So it breaks the selfishness, it cracks the ego. And yeah, I like that. I love those little realizations people have. Yeah.
I mean, and it also, they serve as opportunities for kindness. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the blessing in itself. And I like what you said about having, like, seeing people as who they are, not what they've done. Um, for me, it's like, yeah, the more I observe myself, the more I get to know myself and all of my shortcomings. It's just like you just get flooded with compassion and empathy
Yeah.
and understanding. And in your forgiveness of yourself for those things and wanting to be better, it's more easy for you to forgive others of that. Not saying you are excusing terrible things, but
Yeah.
you see it, like you said, like you're not trying to be condescending or anything. Um, you just have more compassion for the human experience. It's like people are humans, and you can only do that when you first do that for yourself, when you can
Mm-hmm.
forgive yourself, when you can truly love yourself. And I like to use the example, like, you can't make someone a sandwich if you've never made a sandwich before. Like, how do you know what you're giving them if you make it with
Mm-hmm.
mayonnaise and peanut butter and oatmeal, like,
Yeah.
all, like, how do you know that's even good? You have to try the sandwich, you have to know what you're putting in it before you can give it to anyone else.
Yeah.
So taste it before you before you share it, in a way.
Yeah.
Your biggest
I
project
think,
is yourself.
yeah. And I think just as you're saying that, what comes to mind is a great quote from Heidegger. It's really simple, but what he talks about dwelling. To dwell is to live within self. And when you come home to yourself, he calls it to dwell. So, when you sit there and you have these moments of realizing who you are and your authentic self, and you're finally comfortable with who you are, that's called dwelling. And you're finally within yourself. But the quote is, "To dwell is to garden." And I love that. That's like saying that when you finally come home to your authentic self, it's time to begin gardening that self. So it also means, uprooting some of the weeds, doing a little bit of hard work, but growing yourself and growing yourself in directions that you love to do it. So to be yourself is to garden yourself, the garden of the soul. And you, as an avid gardener, I was thinking that that's a perfect quote for you. So
Yeah,
to
it's
work on yourself
honestly,
is to garden the self.
and
Yeah.
I think the more I get into gardening and all of the learning that it's offering to me, to garden isn't just, you don't just plant a flower or pull a weed and it's done. It is a constant living thing that will always be blossoming and blooming and changing, and you're just constantly tending to it.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel that way with myself. Once I think, oh, I've overcome that, something comes and humbles me, and I'm like, no, I haven't. Keep gardening, keep
Yeah.
weeding, and just because you cleared all the weeds doesn't mean they're not going to come back. And so you have to
Yeah.
be mindful and present with yourself and really pay attention. But I mean, the more you do it, the less it feels like work, and it just feels like keeping yourself
That's
honest.
Oh, Brooklyn, that's the most important thing, is that it shouldn't feel like work. When you love your gardening and you love getting into gardening, it is something that you really enjoy. You don't It's not a labor to go and haul wood from one end of the garden to the other when you love your garden. So exactly the same as the self, that when you're doing self-development, it should be like gardening. And I often say to people as well that when you hit a period of happiness, that's like you've got the garden right. But when you get the garden right, you don't just walk away and leave it and go, "Oh, I'm happy now. That's it. I'm done." It's exactly the same as a garden. If you leave it, the weeds will start to grow, things like that. And the other thing is studying yourself too. Why are those weeds growing in those areas? Or why do I get sad at that? Why do I get angry at this? And try to understand where these come from. Don't just pluck them up, but understand why they grow there. These feelings, these emotions. And that's really, it's very it's very poetic, but it works. It fits. It really does. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was the shortest quote I could find, and I thought, yeah, yeah, that suits Brooklyn, I think. Yeah, to dwell is to garden. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, yeah, it's like very heavily spiritual. I don't know if you have a lot of comments going on. Someone, Amanda says, I think it was back when we were talking about capitalism and would it work with if we were all being very authentic. He said collaboralism. I think that's really cool.
Is it Amanda? Amanda said that. Is
Yeah.
it? Okay, so Amanda, so I teach political theory sometimes, and there's a form of politics called communitarianism. Now it sounds like communism, but it really isn't. But it's basically community. It's all about communities and coming together as communities. And communitarianism is kind of like that, like cooperative working together and making sure that everybody's well-being is number one, as opposed to everybody's profit is number one. So it's a nice idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Communitarianism. That's really
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it.
cool. um, what do you think people's fear is about prioritizing the well-being of each other over our financial health or financial success or whatever you want to put in place of that?
I think that at the root cause of, like I often think of, like, in a corporate atmosphere, the idea of making a killing, and it's a cutthroat world, and but at the very core of this is almost like a love to be secure, or a want to succeed that comes from a need to be secure. So in other words, I'll never be safe unless I have the first million, or I'll never be secure unless I outcompete my competitor. And this competitive element, particularly like latter half 20th century, early 21st century, just seems to be very, it's overwhelmed the idea of working together. And it's even rewritten a lot of stuff. Like, um, there's another philosopher called Kropotkin, and he talks about mutualism. And he was around the same time as Darwin. And Darwin said that it's about competition and the fitting to the best adaptation to making you successful. And that's how things work. But this guy, Kropotkin, he went into the forests in Siberia and he did the same thing that Darwin did. He studied nature. He said, no, all the animals, I can see them, they actually work together. And he gave examples of how, like in a biosphere, things work together. So, people may talk about in a capitalist society that it's individuals trying to be successful and making the best that they can be. But if you take away the community from them, they're nothing. There's the minute that you are an individual and everything else goes, there's nothing. So really this element of hyper individuality and competition and cutthroatness, I mean, it's good in trying to convince a person to excel in what they're doing. But I just don't think it's very good in trying to convince you to be more well-being orientated towards others. I've never quite understood it. I'm definitely biased because I'm not a competitive person at all. So, yeah.
Amanda also says she thinks people mistake freedom for individualism.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. Yes, totally. That we could do an entire session on that one statement alone, and there's so much to it. And it's one of the most hotly debated political philosophy ideas and the philosophy of ethics and justice, that individuality and freedom somehow have something to do with each other, or are so connected that they can't be seen as taken apart. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. Yeah, spot on, Amanda. Absolutely. One of the commenters here, yeah, definitely said spot on. Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, our ideas of what security is, to be safe and to be like, oh, I'm protected. Um, how that doesn't translate through community gardens and sharing resources. Like, okay, for example, if the economy crashed right now, people would panic. But like, how different would it be if we were all growing little gardens, and maybe someone had some chickens and maybe someone did this and that, and we were like, okay, well, look, I have this to offer, and I do need whatever you have, so let's just do a little barter system. Or like, that idea of community and watching out for each other, I think, is a more secure idea to begin with. So it just seems like, yeah, the competition, or like, I have to secure my place in this world before I can even care about you.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
sort of seems like the least secure thing you can do is to turn
Yeah.
everybody against you in your little circle. Like, don't we work better together? Don't we work better as a team? And I think that maybe people are afraid that if they work together with other people, they're limited by other people's ideas, or like having to do what other people want to do, which I understand. You want to come into this world and make your own way and have your own say for how you want things to go. But I don't think that there's something that we're missing here in terms of like, you don't have to be just like everyone else in order to work with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can still be authentic and you can still make decisions and do things for yourself without sacrificing your ability to connect with other people in supportive and meaningful ways.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we fear. Like, what fear is that based off of? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I think I'm finding it difficult to try and put myself in the perspective of the person, because I'm just not a very competitive person. I don't understand. My life has always been in community work or humanitarian work, overseas from my 20s, early 30s, and here at home, all of it's about community. And actually, you're just after talking about like barter systems and sharing stuff. Something I was working on this afternoon in work was talking about setting up skill sharing systems if there's ever a collapse, that people will have the skills to share with each other about how to rear chickens, how to grow their food, and have a seed bank available that we can teach people immediately how to do that stuff to make us more resilient as a community, to transition on to more survival aspect. I know it sounds like fear mongering, but it's something, we had a little bit of extra money left over, so we thought this would be a nice like safety cushion to develop.
Yeah.
But you're totally right that I don't understand either why there's a concept of like that make a killing, that particularly that kind of corporate atmosphere of I have got to be the best, and feck everybody else. I'm going to make it in life, and that's my security, my family, and I just don't get this. I don't know. Is the answer. I'm not sure, Brooklyn. Um, because for me, it sounds like an insanity to be so disconnected with your fellow humans that you would disregard their well-being, because they're part of you. It's like the idea of a segment of society being like disregarding the humanity of another segment of society is like your hand disregarding the health of your foot and chopping it off. Because we're all one, we're part of this world. And when we hurt part of this world, we're hurting ourselves. And when we work as one and we work as a team, as a family of humans, we actually go far further, ever, than we have before. So, yeah, I do feel that, like that Wolf of Wall Street type mentality is a form. I have a feeling, a slight feeling that in future centuries they will look back at that and go, there was a kind of sickness in humanity at that time. That the idea to want to do that and be that and have that life and think that is the end all of happiness. And yet the lessons we learn from all of these stories is that they crash. They have mental and well-being crashes, and they go, God, it was a rush, but it was so unhealthy. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to realize, is that it's our connectivity and our sense of belonging that brings us a sense of happiness, not the adrenaline rush, not the victory over another person and crushing them out of existence. That is not what gives you contentment. At the end of the day, there's always a loser, so we're not improved as a people when we're not looking after the well-being of others. So I don't get it. And I sometimes in my darker times, I think, are we hardwired to be like this? Are we errors of biology that maybe we were developed as hunters and we think we're still hunters, but we're hunting ourselves. So
It's funny you say that. I'm going to throw something that's kind of maybe off the wall, but I'm going to share it anyway because I trust Daniel, I trust you, and then people on TikTok, if you're watching me, you're cool. Anyway, what if this these ideas that we have, the negativity that you're talking about, this like selfishness, they're energies, right? I mean, could you agree that it's an energy that we take on and express through ourselves? Okay, so what if as this vessel, this sensory experience that is the body, is here to purify that in a way of taking on the energy, you feel it, some people succumb to it, they get totally consumed by it and they become this thing, or some people deal with the energy of like, okay, there's selfishness, how do I fix that, and they transmute it and turn it into something really beautiful, and in transforming it within themselves they're able to help other people do that as well. So maybe it's just like this energy that we're here to evolve into something higher consciousness, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, it's a silly thought that I had, but what you just said reminded me of it.
Well, yeah, I know we're talking about Martin Heidegger, but one of his predecessors that inspired him was a philosopher called Friedrich Nietzsche. A lot of people who are slightly into philosophy will know Nietzsche, but Nietzsche's philosophy said that, we're not actually a species. We're a bridge between species. We're halfway. We're not quite what we were, and we're not quite what we're supposed to be. And what we're going through right now is a transition of evolution. So, yeah, I mean, I would agree that we are in this kind of moment of transiting that is as beings that move energy, and everything is energy. That vibrates at different levels. I believe that it's not, as one commenter said here, it's not silly Brooklyn, and it isn't, absolutely not. It's completely makes sense, because when you look at when you energy vibrates fast, it becomes energetic, and when it vibrates slowly, it becomes a more solid state. So everything is energy, just vibrating at different levels. So when it comes down to ourselves and how we act towards one another, I think that, yeah, I think there are patterns of energy, and at the moment we're going through something that maybe is a necessary, what we think is selfishness, but a necessary pain to evolve into something more. And I don't know what that is, but I hope it's something good. But yeah, I do feel that there's something happening within the human race that will bring us to somewhere that's very, very interesting. Hopefully something better.
Or perhaps those things are there simply to offer the opportunity to come back to self.
Yeah.
Because my guru, Muji, says that when you are disrupted by things that are unpleasant, it simply is a reminder that this is not permanent. Don't get too comfortable here.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I don't know.
There's another way of thinking um, that says that the universe is conscious, and that it manifests itself in different forms. And eons ago, it was essentially unconscious, but it wanted to be conscious, and it birthed itself into beings to try and understand itself, and to be itself, and learn about itself, and to be different. And it stumbled on this thing called self consciousness. It threw itself out into these little beings called humans, who forgot they're actually part of the universe. And they began thinking that they're different to it. And in that thinking, were able to learn more about the universe, because they had that gap. In other words, it's like, I'm not in the painting, so I can see the painting. So the universe itself said, I need to be apart from myself to see myself. And it created us. And in doing that, it's probably, it's probably undergoing the necessary pain through us to try and understand itself. And I'm kind of a believer in this, that the universe itself is unfolding in a way that is, it doesn't make sense. There's no law that says the universe should be becoming more ordered and more complicated at a minute level. There's nothing to say that evolution should go in the direction that there are more neurons in our brains, in one of our brains, than there are stars in the galaxy. That in itself is, why would evolution do that? So I believe that this consciousness thing is something that is very important, that the universe is hungry to create self-consciousness of itself. And that's why there is a hunger for humans to become more prolific, and to consume and to multiply, because we're this sudden stumbling into self-consciousness of existence. And that's what's trying to drive us to become more and more and more individuals, because we think that every individual is giving a new, fresh, different subjective experience for an objective universe. And if you believe in, for example, Advaita Vedanta, a type of Hindu philosophy, when you die, you will bring that right back. It's almost like a code that goes out, and when you die, it goes right back to the matrix and enhances the matrix. Because we will teach the universe how to be better by the lives we're living, if we're living individually, authentically. So it's this, and that, right back to Heidegger. So the most important thing is to live authentically, because the existence itself wants to live in as many different ways as possible, as many different authenticities as possible, so it can taste the flavor of itself through us. And when we do that, we're doing what it wants and what we want, because we're the same thing.
Creation is a verb.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a noun, it's a
Creation
verb.
didn't
Yeah,
start and now it's like, okay, creation. Like
yeah.
we are creating all of the time.
Well, I'm going to come back to one quote I wrote down from Heidegger. It's another quote I really love, and it kind of touches exactly on this. It's about being, so being, existing. And he says, The human being is not the lord of beings, but the shepherd of being. We are
That's
shepherding
good.
existence. We're not here to master it. We're here to shepherd it. And it's a lovely quote. We're not the lord of beings, but the shepherd of being. That's pretty important, I think,
I
to
think
realize that.
that's fantastic. I want to
Hmm.
say a lot more about that. I have a few comments that I don't want to get too far away from, though.
Sure.
Amanda says that she's been contemplating this very deeply, Daniel. So she's very excited about this conversation.
Excellent.
And she also said something I liked. It says, I think our next step, evolving as a human community, is collaborating through individual creativity, which is cool. Learning how to maintain that authentic piece of us and bring it to a greater platform.
Yeah.
And then Jonathan here says, you have to grow enough so that you can see that collaboration doesn't dissolve or negate self, which is, yes. It takes a lot of work to be able to come to that conclusion. And I mean, I wouldn't say like a lot of work. I don't want to make it sound like it's difficult and like so unattainable, but it does take a conscious effort. You have to make that decision and really truly like commit to that.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult when we are busy getting lost in our inauthentic everyday lives.
But
It's hard to go
actually,
insane.
kind of what you're just after saying, and what Jonathan has said about maintaining the self kind of thing, again brings me back to one of the quotes that always jumps back to me from Heidegger, and I'm just going to read it. It's, we should never allow our fears or the expectations of others to set the frontiers of our destiny. So we should never allow our fears or expectations of others to set the frontiers of our destiny. And for me, that's all about sustaining the self. And not ego, but that self, that authentic self that you were talking about at the beginning. And that's really important. It's really good.
I'm still caught up on the shepherds of being. That is so.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's awesome
Yeah.
because when you think about it, it's like, you know, we have freedom of choice. We can always choose what we want to do, how we want to move forward at every given moment. And so, as a shepherd of being, and what we were talking about earlier with like creation is always happening, it's like we really are making this as we go. It's not something that we can't control or we have to go along with. It's
Yeah.
a freshness to it, and I think it. When you really connect to that, it's like, okay, what do I really want to make of this experience? I can really do something good, even if everybody else wants to do something else. I can be the shepherd of this moment that I'm experiencing as this vessel, and that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that more people should feel empowered in their authentic self. You know, a lot of people.
Your life is your flock of sheep.
Yeah.
So and it's nice. I know we're hitting a few analogies here, like it's a garden, but also your life is like a flock of sheep. It's there not just to, it's there not just to hurt and to master. It's there to care for, to live with, to move along, make sure it's sustained, and make sure it's looked after. Yeah.
It's very much like. Well, I don't know. We are using a lot of analogies and things like that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I don't know where I was going with it. Forget it.
But the shepherd of being, is that one that stuck with you?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
I mean, I think I'm going to have to contemplate on it more. We'll have another discussion on it. But it hit a nerve. I like it.
Can I just throw out Marencius has said here, thank you. This was one of the most interesting live TikToks I've ever seen. Love and respect to you both. Thank you,
That's
Marencius.
nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But I might come back.
Yes.
Cool. Just something that Amanda touched on there, which is really important, is particularly with what we're talking about about being and about our authenticity, the difference between individuality and freedom. So it's very important that when you try to be an individual, you don't necessarily have to feel free. Sometimes you try to be an individual, and then you stumble on, oh, well, someone else is doing that, or someone else has covered that ground, or you know, I do. I paint, so sometimes I've painted something, and gone, wow, that's really unique and original, and I come across something that's very similar that someone else has done, and I feel a little bit crushed by it. So, in other words, I'm free to express myself, but I see it in other people doesn't mean that I'm any less of an individual. And I think that it kind of comes back to something that Jonathan was saying there about that, the, I guess the cross pollination of ideas and how we influence each other comes into that we can be both individuals and free, but it also means that we have that kind of, it's a mixed relationship. We're an alloy. We're not one element of another. We're an alloy of two together. And I think that's really um, something that's very important to keep in mind, especially with Heidegger, is that we should strive to be individuals and try to be free, but don't get dismayed if your freedom leads to an individuality that isn't totally unique. And some people do feel a little bit, um, I don't know, disgruntled at the idea that I'm not original or I'm not totally unique.
Yeah.
It's okay too. It's I often think like I always, when I'm younger, I always wanted to be different, and now I'm older, I'm kind of like, but it's okay. I'm free to choose not to be different now. So I'm free not to be the one that's out doing crazy things. So yeah, we have that, and it's an odd relationship. I think there's a lot to unpack in what she said, and there's that question, contemplating how those two things interact in our lives, is really important to think about. Yeah.
So, with what you just said, I have a thought, and I want your opinion. Obviously, when you say individual and wanting to be that individual, wanting to always kind of be set apart from the rest, would you say that it would be a better word? Authenticity would be a better word for that. I think
Yeah.
authenticity is always better than individual, because when you are striving to be an individual, there's sort of like this ego behind it that like wants to be kind of special, or like set apart from the rest, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we all have experienced that, but when you're authentic, it's a natural thing. It's kind of like a thumbprint. We're all these
Mm-hmm.
little thumbprints. We're all different, and there
Yeah.
may be similarities, but at the end of the day, no two are the same.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you focus on, like Heidegger said, is a very authentic space of being, you don't even have to try. You'll always just be this unique thing.
There's a happiness in being an individual, but there's a contentment in being authentic.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a more subtle form of being yourself. Both are, but I think it's a more subtle and nourishing form of being yourself, because you're not necessarily trying to be something that's different or individual, as in separate from everybody else. Because individualism sometimes it leads you, by avoiding one dis-ease of the soul, Heidegger talks about, into the other dis-ease of the soul. I'm going to be so free, I'm going to cut myself off from others. So you've cured yourself of one, but you've got another disease. So, but authenticity doesn't do that. Authenticity maintains your coming home to an authentic, genuine feeling of yourself, but also connected to others, instead of being so individuated. Because individual doesn't have to mean cut off. It means you're a person. No man is an island. Person is an island. So
Sort of like individualism would be more of your identity to others in this world, and authenticity is simply your being. Like authenticity
yeah,
is the ingredient, and then individualism is what you do with it. Is that what you're kind of saying? What you make
yeah,
it, sort of.
yeah. I think that authenticity is when you stumble into authenticity, it's a feeling that you've come home into yourself, because it's a genuine self. But that doesn't necessarily happen with individuality. You can be an individual and you can practice individuality without being authentic. There are many people who do, um, and that's, I guess, where the freedom comes in. You're not truly being free for doing that, because with Heidegger he says that if you're not authentic, you're trapped by other people's influences. You're trapped by social conditioning. So the person who says, "I'm free to be an individual. I'm going to go out there and make a killing or whatever." Well, actually, that feeling you have that I'm going to go out and make a killing in a corporate atmosphere or whatever, that's the corporate social conditioning talking. So you're not free. You're too influenced by the chatter of society, and it comes back to one of Heidegger's core elements: the difference between being myself and they self. So he says that when you listen to society and society drowns you with its voices, with its chatter, he calls it, um, you become a they self. Your individuality gets lost in the herd. So you must strive to become myself or I self and get rid of that chatter. And it comes back to Nietzsche says that morality is the herd instinct of the individual. He's not saying become immoral. He's just saying find your morals, your authentic core values, because otherwise you're living the herd instinct of the individual, of the herd instinct of society. So it's really important that you try and find your core values and do some work on that. And it kind of comes back to the whole garden analogy. You got to find what you want to grow in that garden. It doesn't matter what you grow, as long as you grow what's authentic to you and what thrives in your garden. So that's pretty important. And sometimes we have to scratch it right back down to the bedrock and start from scratch. And sometimes we can take what we're given in our social conditioning, in our thrownness, and we can use that to build an authentic self. But one way or another, we have to confront ourselves. We have to look into the mirror of who we are and be brave enough to try and find an authenticity and a genuine expression of self that avoids those three dis-eases of the soul. Yeah.
Amanda says individualism is I can do what I want, and authenticity is I can be who I am. That's great.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. I guess the question that, or the statement Amanda asks there, or says there, I can be who I am. That one statement is, I guess, an explanation in one sentence of what Martin Heidegger's biggest book, Being in Time, that you have right there, is about. I can be who I am. What is I? What is can? What is be? What is who? And what is am? And he will actually drive into each of those words and go, I'm not just, we're so easy, we always say, I am a being. I am being. But he says, you know what? I'm going to drill down. I'm going to spend like 3 chapters talking about what being is or what amness is. And he will go and invent words to try and understand deeply what this means. Yeah.
It's funny because earlier today I was like, I wish someone would just summarize what he's saying in a way that was like super easy, because I'm tired of listening to all of these long drawn out videos that don't tell me anything. And there it is. Thanks,
yeah. She's got it. Yeah. The other thing I would say is, and it's really important, in regards to Heidegger, is don't let the idea of death put you off. A lot of, and he says it himself, that we're uncomfortable with death, and his obsession with death sometimes puts people off reading him. So, and I just want to, again, the last quote that I remarked, or I wrote down for today's session, is about that. If I take death into my life, acknowledge it and face it squarely, I will free myself from the anxiety of death and the pettiness of life, and only then will I be free to become myself.
Spot on, Heidegger.
I
think that is very true.
And I'm just gonna I suppose to touch personally, for those listening, Brooklyn and I lost our fathers. Not brother and sister. We didn't lose our father. We lost our fathers a couple of years ago, and I guess one of the things that certainly I got was, and Heidegger says there, facing death or touching death, um, it makes you realize the pettiness of life, you know. And when my dad died, suddenly all those things you're worried about, like the deadlines or the, you know, the key performance indicators for work or these little fights with friends or whatever, suddenly you realize, wow, life's actually much more. The important things about life are a walk down by a river and appreciating birdsong more than hitting your targets, more than making sure someone else is happy with your behavior or trying to make sure someone is okay. These things that cause us anxiety, they don't have to. We don't have to choose them. And death makes us realize the important things in life. That's what Heidegger is on about with death. That death wakes us up to living. And that's really important to understand. But also, as one of my lecturers once said, you got to really be cognizant of the fact that he's trying to talk about death as a positive thing. And in society, a lot of people don't like to think about Heidegger because we genuinely don't. We're full of life, especially in modern society. We've never had it so good. You know, with living and excitement and travel and media and all of these things. Last thing we want to think about is death. We are the one society that sweeps death under the carpet so much. In every previous generation, death has been closer to us, but we are not. We're forgetting how to live because we're not seeing death.
Right. We think we have all the time in the world, and we take advantage of it.
Yeah. You know? So it's really that's one of the valuable things. Yeah. So authenticity.
Everything has an expiration date, so enjoy it while you can. Make the most of it. Just concentrated joy and fun and just savor it.
As one poet said, suck the marrow from life.
Yes.
Yeah. It's true. It's really important.
That's the energy that we are adopting. Life is fleeting. We will enjoy it, and we will inspire others around us to enjoy it as well.
Yeah. The other, that's you know what, that's one of the most important things. Like that death is a gift that teaches you to appreciate life. If we never died, we wouldn't appreciate it. And I think as well, the more we sweep death under the carpet in modern society, the more we're becoming less appreciative of life. It's ironic that the further away it is, the less we enjoy it. It's that finitude, it's that possibility of it not being there that makes life even sweeter. So, yeah, enjoy it.
It's almost like
flourish in it.
We have not in a bad way, but like there's this arrogance. Oh, you know, I'm here forever, and death is that humility of like, oh no, I'm not. What am I gonna do here? Everyone needs that.
Yeah, that wake up call, definitely. But you know what? It's also something that I think that there's this kind of cult in society that is this life worshipping cult, that invincibility cult, that where nothing can touch us, nothing can hurt us, nothing can, and even if it does, we'll make sure it can't because we'll be covered with X, Y, and Z insurance, or we'll have X, Y, and Z medicines, or I'm not dying. I'm getting a facelift every week in my 60s. You know, so no, I'm not dying. I just got a boob job. So, you know, anything not to face this, you know, and I'm one of those people that, like, I'm 41 now, and I said to someone the other day, look, I'm not interested in wasting time on things I'm not interested in. I want to live. And yeah, it was something I just had to be very firm with someone, and I just said it to them like that, and I just realized that, you know what, I want to die with dignity. I want to spend the rest of my life, you know, living, not the rest of my life running from death. And that's what a lot of people do. You know, when they retire, they end up, you know, doing everything they can not to think about where they are. You know, I want to go and I want to greet death with open arms and go, thank you for a great life. You were a great companion that reminded me to live. Thank you so much. Yeah.
The conversation kind of reminded me of ancient Egypt when they were buried with all of their belongings and things like that to take with them. That's kind of how we are, right?
Yeah.
Look at all this
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely.
Right?
And future archaeologists will probably be trying to figure out the same thing, looking at us going, what? Why were they doing? Why were they living like this? What? Why were 75-year-olds getting face lifts and boob jobs and tucks and
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, sometimes I think about this in a very healthy way, right? Like, I am um, not like in a bad way, but like sometimes I sit and I think like if I were like a little old lady sitting out in my garden, knowing that this was my last day on earth, what would I be thinking about? What are the things that I would be like, oh, wasn't that wonderful? Or I'm so glad I did that. What are the things that I'm going to really truly savor on my last day? And what are the things that I'd be like, you know what, that wasn't even important. I don't know why I wasted so much energy on that. And sometimes, like, if you put things in perspective like that, you're like, oh yeah, you know,
Yeah.
those are the important things. The connections that we have with people, the the tender moments of kindness that we share with other people. Like those are the things that really feed your soul when it's time to transition. Those are the things that you take with you wherever it is that you're going. So, you know, invest your time, invest your energy in the things that actually last. Don't invest in the things that turn to dust. You know?
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
That's a beautiful, beautiful idea. Yeah. I'm getting a sense of you on that porch in the garden, sipping that tea.
Yep. There's me.
Perfect.
Life is simple, you know? Guys, listen. Yeah. Life is simple. It's the inauthentic chatter of the mind that makes it very complicated.
Yeah. And that's perfectly put in Heideggerian language. Yeah. So, can I ask you, do you have a greater grasp or better sense of what Heidegger's trying to say in his philosophy from the hour that we've had?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's there, but it's hidden by a lot of big words, you know, and a lot of complex sentence structures. I'm just like, okay, wait, what? Yeah. Design and like all this other stuff, and I'm just like, okay, I'm spending more time trying to like translate than like getting to the meat of it, and this was very helpful in just regular terminology of who Heidegger was and what he was saying. And I think I'm so excited to get into this book, Being in Time.
I will say one thing though regarding Heidegger's personality, and it's something maybe yourself and Martin Heidegger share. Heidegger hated cities. He was convinced that we are in large built up areas, there's too much social conditioning and too much chatter for us to be our authentic selves. And for him, it was all about communities, villages, the countryside. And he said that for humans to be, I suppose, more authentic selves, we need to have less overwhelmingness from the society around us. So his favorite thing was like going and living in a cabin in the woods and working on a book and having a little village nearby he would visit from time to time and engage with people, because it gave him the freedom to get a sense of authenticity and a scope of a canvas to draw his own authentic self on. So he kind of, like an artist, you know, you're not going to be able to paint something if you're cramped with everybody else. You need a bit of space to try and figure out who you are and what you want and where you want to be and what your values are. And he said that cities don't allow you to do that. Cramped social conditions don't allow you to do this. So, and it didn't mean like, you know, all cities. Just mean you need to have a space of eunice just for you. You know, whether it's a garden or go into the countryside for a walk every week, but you need open space. And for him, nature was exceptionally vital to being human. And if we ever did away with nature, we would kill ourselves because we'd lose ourselves. Totally.
Well, we are nature, you know.
Yeah.
What are we without nature? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, nature has played a huge role in my ability to understand myself more and come into a deeper space within myself. Definitely. And I do think we all need those moments where we have to consider who we are without everyone else, who we are without everything. And Cold Weather Rose, he says, we're social creatures, we want that. I think that is absolutely true. I also think that we can be social creatures bringing something good and authentic to the social platform, or we can be just like totally chaotic energies, like feeding off of other things and just like, just like, what is the word I want to use? I'm sorry.
But if you want to be an authentic individual, how can you be without ever having stepped outside the school of fish that you're in?
Right. Well, I guess what I'm saying is we are social creatures. We need that interaction. But the interactions are going to be substantially more nurturing, more valuable.
Yeah.
They'll be more valuable when we bring something true from ourselves instead of just echoing things that we've picked up and trying to be something that we're not. I think there's great value in knowing who you are and what you are before you share it with other people. So
diversity is the beautiful ability for difference to coexist and cross pollinate, but you will never be able to bring anything different to the table if you haven't stepped outside of yourself or of a social conditioning. And that's, I guess it comes back to like the idea of, the old idea of communism. That's the big danger, is that you would create a society where everything's so uniform, nobody can step outside the system. Therefore, nobody could bring a difference and a vibrancy. And that's why you have creativity dipping. That's why you have ingenuity dipping, because nobody's bringing a uniqueness to the table. So we are absolutely social creatures. Totally. I totally agree with that. And Heidegger would agree with that because, the interconnectivity element. But we must bring something authentically unique to the table for us to enrich each other in our engagements. If we're not bringing something that we discover on our own to the togetherness of each other, then we're not enhancing ourselves as a group, as a community, as a species. Good.
This has been awesome. I mean, it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I hope everyone watching has gotten something valuable out of this. If not, just being entertained on a Friday with us.
Mm-hmm. I know. And again, I would say to folks who are tuning in, if they want to like either of our channels, or we do have previous lives on YouTube under the Philosophy Nook. And I would also say that, we can take suggestions if there's any ideas. Like Amanda's idea there about individuality and freedom, that's stuck in my head now. I'm like, wow, that's a great question to discuss, So yeah, if people have suggestions or ideas, or if they want to continue, like comments in YouTube as well. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Kevo, Andrew, I see you guys. Thank you. It's hard to respond to every comment, as we're having a conversation, but we see you and I appreciate you. And everybody on Daniel's side too.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, and thank you, Brooklyn.
All right, fantastic. You guys have a great weekend. We'll see you.
You too. Bye, folks. Bye.